To President Emmanuel Macron, congratulations. Congratulations for convening this Africa Forward Summit, and congratulations for forging this renewed partnership between France and Africa for African development. Your Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the name of this summit captures the moment and the mission: Africa Forward. Forward through one of the most turbulent global moments in living memory. Africa is not waiting. Africa is moving, and Africa is leading. African continents are driving one of the defining debates of our time on how to reform a global financial architecture designed in 1945 for a world that no longer exists. Africa played a leading role in the approval of the Pact of the Future by the General Assembly of the United Nations. It is African leadership building new tools like the Borrowers' Platform, and so that the countries can speak as one and negotiate from strengths. Challenging the credit rating systems that locks too many of the borrowing tools they need. Africa has had a leadership in securing the Seville commitment to expand the lending power of multilateral development banks, to mobilize private capital at scale, and to deliver relief from the debt burden crushing developing economies. It is African leadership through the African Development Bank that is advancing a bold vision to reform the continental's financial architecture from within, mobilizing African resources for African priorities and prosperity. Africa is driving a UN framework convention on international tax cooperation so that countries are no longer cheated out of what is what is rightfully theirs. And I want to praise the African leaders that have understood that is absolutely essential also to do everything with the adequate policies and strategies to mobilize a much stronger share of national resources in order to be able to accelerate the development of the continent. And it is African leadership, alongside the small island states and other developing countries on the front lines, that has placed the climate emergency where it belongs, at the center of the global agenda. This is not a continent waiting for solutions, this is a continent producing them. But let us be honest about what stands in Africa's way. A global system designed without Africa and still largely operating without Africa, perpetuating century-old injustices. A continent of more than 1.5 billion people with no permanent seats on the UN Security Council, as was referred by President Ruto. Without the voice, the representation and decision-making power it deserves inside the international financial institutions that shape this economy, it's not Africa that loses, it's the world that loses the fact that the voice of Africa is not conveniently taken into account. Meanwhile, as we all know, official development assistance is collapsing. Aid budgets cut, partnerships unwound, commitments walked back just as the need is greatest. So this is not only a financial crisis, this is a crisis of solidarity. Take climate change. Africa did not cause it, yet the continent is warming faster than the global average, bearing the harshest consequences in displaced communities, lost harvests, and economic shocks. Today's global energy turmoil, volatile fossil fuel markets, fragmented trade is deepening fiscal stress, inflation, and stunted development across the continent. Africa must be be at the center of climate justice. The continent holds 60% of the world's best solar potential and receives 2% of global clean energy investments. With the right finance, Africa could generate 10 times more electricity than it needs by 2040 entirely from renewables. Yet, 600 million Africans still live without electricity. And 1 billion still rely on unclean cooking, a crisis that takes 800,000 lives a year, mostly women and children, mostly out of sight. And on average, the continent faces borrowing costs twice as high as OECD countries as an average, draining resources that should be building the future. That is not a market verdict on Africa. It is a verdict on the injustices of the system. The continent also holds extraordinary reserves of the critical minerals the green transition depends on. For too long, the pattern has been the same. Africa's resources have been extracted, the value captured elsewhere, the environmental damage left behind. The United Nations panel on critical energy transitions minerals points the way.